I'm just going to start things off here. My name is Maureen Higgins, and for some of you this may be a little bit of a repeat, so I apologize for that, but my name is Maureen Higgins. I'm the Cancer Health Outreach Educator at the Dempsey Center for Cancer Hope and Healing, which is a place located in Lewiston, and it's there in support of folks who have been diagnosed with cancer. So we don't offer treatment there, but we offer support services, things like massage and Reiki, nutrition counseling, nutrition classes, support groups, social work services, a variety of things like that. We also have a specific children's program, and it's for kids who have been impacted by cancer. So they may have a parent, a grandparent, somebody in their life who's important to them who's been diagnosed with cancer. And again, we've got a variety of different services available for those kiddos. And that's from little children all the way up to young adults. Everything that we do at the Dempsey Center is free of charge, and it does not matter where a person lives, where they were diagnosed, where they were treated, how long ago it was. Anybody can access the services of the Dempsey Center, and we fundraise primarily through the Dempsey Challenge, and I don't know if anybody here has participated or heard of that, but the challenge is a 2-day event, and it's happening this year at the beginning of October 1 and 2. And there's a 5 and 10K on one day, there's a cycle on the second day, and that's really the way that we keep the Dempsey Center free of charge, so that's a little bit about what we do. My role is to come out into the community and chat with people about ways to reduce cancer. And I know we had a little bit of a conversation about that a couple weeks ago with some of the folks that were here. So before we kind of launch into the environmental toxins piece here, that actually Maureen is going to do, I just want to start with kind of a discussion about what cancer is. So as many of you know, our bodies are made up of cells, and they all have jobs to do. And the thing with cancer is that they are damaged cells. Sometimes they're damaged from the inside, something in the DNA, and sometimes they're damaged from the outside, something in our environment. And those damaged cells grow and multiply and grow and multiply and grow and multiply, but don't have a job to do. So instead what happens, they interrupt and get in the way of the normal cells trying to do their jobs. And the other thing that's really important to know about cancer is that it truly is a broad category. And my analogy to that is that it's similar to fruit. There are a variety of different fruits. There are bananas and apples, grapes and pineapples and mangoes and all of these different fruit. And they grow differently, they look different, all of those kinds of things. That's similar to cancer. There are a variety of different types of cancers. And even within one category of cancer, there are different types. So if you think about apples, there's Macintosh and Red Delicious and Golden Delicious and Pink Lady and all these different apples. In the same way that if we're talking about, let's say, a skin cancer, there's squamous cell, basal cell, and melanoma. And again, that's really important because we treat somebody differently depending on the type of cancer that they have. That's also why when they're asking for research dollars for cancer, they ask for so many research dollars, because it's not one thing called cancer. It is hundreds of things called cancer. And also why, if you know two people who have, the same diagnosis, but the treatment is very different, again, probably a really good reason for that. So just kind of that little bit of a background about what cancer is. Any questions about that? And that's a very simplistic explanation, obviously, but I think it's just one to sort of start things off. Any questions? Okay. So today, part of the discussion is really looking at ways that we can reduce our risk. And again, with many cancers, we don't know why they occur. It's not anything that somebody did, and it's not anything that somebody didn't do. We don't know why they occur. I had a physician once that talked about sort of cancer, and he talked about it as chops on a tree. And one of those chops might be our genetics, and one of those chops might be something in our environment, and one of those chops might be our sun exposure. So all of these different things, and we never know what's going to fell that tree. And so one of the things that we really are focusing on are what are the things that we have control over. Because there are certain behaviors that we know either increase or decrease our risk of cancer. And so environmental toxins being one of them. And Mariah, who is a University of Maine Farmington student, is actually going to do the presentation on the environmental toxins. And I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself. Okay?
So like Maureen said, I'm a senior at University of Maine Farmington. I'm a community health education student, so that's kind of what brings me here today. So let's talk a little bit about the environment and cancer. So here are just some objectives. By the end of the presentation, participants should be able to, 1, define what a carcinogen is, and 2, list 2 ways that you can take control. So what? Why does this matter? How does the environment play a role in cancer? So environmental factors like tobacco smoke, nutrition, physical activity, and exposure to environmental carcinogens has been estimated to be responsible for 75 to 80% of cancer diagnosis and death. And 6% of the cancer deaths per year are directly related to occupational and environmental exposures to carcinogens. And we'll talk about carcinogens in just a minute. So just to give you guys a background, there are nearly 80,000 chemicals on the market in the United States, many of which millions of Americans are exposed to in their daily lives. And these are largely unregulated. Exposure is widespread, so it happens all over. One example of this was in the news recently about lumber liquidators. Their laminate flooring was found to have a greater risk of causing cancer or health problems. So the CDC found that people who purchased the China-made laminate flooring actually had 3 times more likely to get cancer. So since that happened, lumber liquidators hasn't been going out to China to have their flooring made. Their stocks have also plummeted since then, so it just shows how their reputation has been a piece of that. Another thing that we'll talk about is how these 2 things, the environment and cancer, it's not well understood. The research is really limited, and just in my own research going out there, it says in a lot of the studies, it's hard to say this definitely causes cancer or this definitely doesn't, because what we're studying is humans. Obviously we don't want to cause cancer, so it's really hard to study how the environment plays a role. So what we're talking about today, I'm going to go through different sources and types of contaminants, and then ways that you can take control as an individual. Of course, a lot of these things, it's going to take policy, many other factors to try to work on this, but there's individual choices that we can all make that can really help your own life. Next one. So a little pretest. What is a carcinogen and what are endocrine disruptors? So I just think these are 2 really good terms to know before we get in. So can anyone tell me what a carcinogen is, or what you think it is, based on the word? Does anyone know?
Cancer-causing agent?
Yeah. So according to the American Cancer Society, substances and exposures that can lead to cancer are called carcinogens. They don't cause cancer every time, all the time. Every carcinogen has different levels of cancer-causing potential. So of course it depends on exposure. Sometimes the carcinogens can cause cells to divide faster than a normal rate. And sometimes it takes a lot, prolonged high levels of exposure to really make a difference. And then of course for any person, the risk of developing cancer really depends on a lot of factors. How long they're exposed to the carcinogen, the length and intensity of the exposure, and the person's own genetic makeup, of course. So now endocrine disruptors. Does anyone know anything about what this is? Endocrine disruptors? This is fairly new, and they're different in that they're chemicals that can interfere with the body's endocrine system. And it can produce adverse reproductive, neurological, and immune effects in humans. So there's a wide range of substances that can have these endocrine disruptors. Some examples are pharmaceuticals, DDT, and pesticides, and plasticizers like BPA that's often found in plastic bottles. They're also found in many everyday products. Some examples, metal food cans, detergents, flame retardants, toys, food, cosmetics. One example is parabens, which some people might have heard here and there. A lot of shampoo bottles and body washes are putting them on those bottles now because a paraben is an endocrine disruptor, and they've found that linked to reproductive harm and cancer. So a lot of research has shown that it can increase risk of breast cancer and prostate cancer in men, as well as other health issues, like I said, with the reproductive issues. So now that we know what these two terms are, I think it's safe for us to get into the sources and types. So first we'll talk about industrial and manufacturing sources. So just to give you guys a little stat, the International Agency for Research on Cancer has evaluated nearly 950 agents and classified more than 400 as known, probable, or possible carcinogens. A large percentage of these compounds are in manufacturing and industrial processes. Millions of workers are exposed on the job to toxic and potentially carcinogenic substances. An example of this is inhalation of asbestos, which is often found, it's a fiber silicate used for industrial purposes. And inhalation of that is the primary cause of mesothelioma, which is a very rare cancer, and it also increases the risk of developing leukemia, lymphoma, and a couple of other cancers as well. So people who work in construction industries, shipyards and asbestos mines and mills are at a higher risk. One study, I thought that this was interesting, one study found that truckers who do short haul pickups and deliveries have a higher risk of death and disease, including lung cancer, than other workers because of the exhaust from the vehicle. Another thing is mercury, which can harm the brain and central nervous systems, and those are found in things like thermometers and batteries. Another source is formaldehyde, which is often found in industrial and manufacturing sources as well. So now we'll talk about agricultural sources. So the entire U.S. population is exposed to these on a daily basis. Many of these chemicals have been known or suspected of having either carcinogens or endocrine disrupting properties. Farm workers specifically are at a higher risk than the general population because they're exposed to pesticides and agricultural chemicals more often than the general population. Migrant workers specifically are at a higher risk because of lack of health care and lack of protective equipment when they're out in the farms working. One study found that leukemia rates are actually higher in children that grow up on farms and among children whose parents use things like pesticides in the home or the garden. So let's talk a little bit about pesticides. These include insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides. There's residues that are found on fruits and vegetables, grain and beverages that are made from contaminated plants and water. There's nearly 1,400 pesticides registered by the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, and exposure to these chemicals have been linked to, this is a long list, brain, breast, colon, lung, ovarian, pancreatic, kidney, testicular, and stomach cancers. And there's an average of 18 new pesticides introduced to the EPA every year. So that's pretty astounding. Now we'll talk about modern lifestyles. Conveniences of modern lifestyles like air travel, car travel, dry cleaning, electricity, those have all made life easier for Americans, but there's been research that has shown that this can have a detrimental effect to our health. Some examples of this are air pollution from outdoor air toxics and local industrial emissions, emissions from cars and boats. These account for about 30% of the overall cancer risk from air pollutants. Also noted is environmental tobacco smoke. So environmental tobacco smoke contains about 4,000 chemicals. Another example is electromagnetic fields, which is generated by the growing amount of wired and wireless technologies. So that's something that the research is still kind of undecided. There's a lot of research saying, yes, cell phones and the electromagnetic fields can lead to brain cancer, and there's some studies negating that, saying there's not. So that's something that's really new in the research right now. It's still up and coming. And then radiation from electric power lines multiplies exposure as well. So now we'll talk about ultraviolet radiation. So that is radiation from UVA and UVB rays. That's from sun lamps, tanning beds, Those cause 3 types of cancer: melanoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and basal cell carcinoma. Consistent sunscreen use, of course, can help reduce or prevent the radiation that damage causes. Now we'll talk about medical sources next. So in the past 2 decades, there have been significant strides in doctors' ability to diagnose and treat diseases, much like cancer. And many of these advances have contributed to health status and longevity. However, there's substantial evidence that medical radiation is a controllable and important cause of breast cancer. So minimizing radiation dose to breast tissue is very important, especially in young girls and women. There's a large amount of radiation emitted during CT scans as well. And pharmaceuticals is another example of a medical source that has caused significant water pollution worldwide. And that's whenever we get rid of those pharmaceuticals, they somehow end up in the water. There's still research being done on the cancer-related effects of pharmaceuticals in drinking water, so the research is still unknown on that. We'll talk about natural sources. So radon gas, that forms from the breakdown of uranium mineral deposits, and it's the second leading cause of lung cancer in the U.S., and the leading cause of lung cancer among people who have never smoked. People who smoke and also are exposed to radon have an even higher risk than from either exposure alone. And radon enters the home through cracks in the floors, walls, or foundations, building materials, and it collects indoors. It's also, what happens is the radon decays, and then it gives off tiny radioactive particles that somehow end up in the, that line the lung, and they damage the cells in the lining of the lung. We'll talk about arsenic, which is a potent toxin found in bedrock at varying levels. Mining and fossil fuels have contributed to waterborne arsenic in the United States. Drinking water has been linked to skin, lung, bladder, and kidney cancer in both sexes, and prostate cancer in men. And arsenic is a known human carcinogen according to the EPA. So now we know all of this stuff, what can we do? Of course, there's so much to be learned about the effects of the environment exposure on cancer risk. However, we as individuals have choices that we can make. We can take important steps to reduce our exposure to environmental elements, and so let's get into that and talk about that. First, we'll talk about reducing your risk of chemical exposures with food and drinks. So we have a handout up there. This is from Environmental Working Group. The Shopper's Guide to Pesticides. So they release a list every year with the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. The Dirty Dozen are the things in the supermarket that you should try to buy organically because they're more likely to have pesticides. The Clean 15 are things that you might be able to just buy from the supermarket and not really worry about the pesticides because those things have been found to be a lot cleaner. So we have some handouts over there, so we'll have this handout up there for you guys to have. So if we choose our food grown without pesticides or chemical fertilizers, wash our conventionally grown produce to remove those residues. Try to eat free-range meat raised without exposure to antibiotics and growth hormones. And also try avoiding or minimizing processed, charred, or well-done meats. They've actually found that the charcoal that are on those meats when you have those barbecues, those have carcinogens in them. So, and then also store and carry water in stainless steel glass or BPA-free water bottles. Microwave food in ceramic or glass because microwaving your food in plastics that can expose you as well. We'll talk about modern lifestyle changes. So test your home for radon levels. About 1 in 15 U.S. homes has at or above the EPA recommendation. Over there we also have this handout, Test Your Home for Radon, Maine.gov released this. And you can buy a kit at $60 or less, I think, and you can get them pretty much everywhere. And then you have to send them into a laboratory to have them tested. Properly dispose of pharmaceuticals, household chemicals, paints, and other materials to minimize drinking water and soil contamination. And then look for labels that say free or platelet free, which is those endocrine disruptors that we talked about. Some other tips is to bike or walk when possible, or use public transportation if you can, to reduce the amount of toxic auto exhaust in the air. And then individuals can reduce or eliminate exposure to secondhand tobacco smoke in their own home, auto, and personal space. Most counseling and medications to help smokers quit are covered by health insurance or are at little to no cost. One resource that we have here in Maine is the Maine Tobacco Helpline. They offer free resources to help Mainers quit, like patches, lozenges, free information, all kinds of stuff. And then next, last thing, I'll talk about household products. So try choosing cleaning products that are made with non-toxic substances. Avoid cleaners that are labeled danger or poison. Those are found to have a lot of carcinogens and toxins in them. Avoid products with the words ammonia or chlorine. And beware of items labeled eco-friendly and natural, because that does not necessarily equate with safety. So on this next slide, we have make your own environmentally friendly cleaning products, which I have another handout up there if you guys want to take with you. This is really cool because it has all kinds of stuff that you probably have in your home. I mean, all of these pretty much have similar ingredients. Baking soda, vinegar, water, lemon juice. You can pretty much come up with these on your own. So we have this handout up there too if you're interested in making your own environmentally friendly cleaning products. And I think, oh, here's some resources for additional information. So the Clean 15 Dirty Dozen, that comes from Environmental Working Group. Their website has so much information and so many articles that are really interesting if you want more information. National Cancer Institute, Environmental Protection Agency, and the Maine Division of Environmental Health. That's where you'll find more information on like Maine specific guidelines and Maine testing kits, etc. That's our references, and that's it. You guys have any questions? Yeah.
Is there, might be a silly question, but is there any type of research in like remediation, like pills or treatment? Like if we're already exposed to things naturally that we can't, or not naturally, in our environment we're exposed to things that we can't limit necessarily. Yeah. Is there any way to like pull those out?
Like reverse it almost?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I haven't seen any research about that. Have you, Maureen? No, that would be cool for us. Yeah.
You mentioned agricultural concerns or risks, but you didn't mention products from our friends Monsanto in terms of genetically modified foods. Is there any research on that? I mean, it seems like a grand experiment in our government, in its infinite wisdom and support of industry or business, doesn't care to label it so we as consumers can see what's genetically modified versus what isn't.
Yeah.
It's in corn products and other things like that.
Yeah.
Right?
I considered putting that in my presentation, but that's opening a whole other can of worms. There is so much research about it and policy. I mean, just recently I saw that they were trying to put in a bill to have every food item labeled with GMOs, and a lot of politicians are against that. So it's really interesting. If I could have talked about that, I would have. I just chose the things that were key points, but that I could do a whole presentation on that alone.
Highlight two summary thoughts that you have at this point in your learning.
On genetically modified foods?
Just two ideas.
Two ideas. I think that the foods definitely should be labeled all foods. I don't know I think that would take a lot of policy action to have that.
Is there any science on the effects of it, positive or negative? Maybe it's neutral, maybe it's fine. Maybe not. Though.
I didn't get to do
What I looked at is there is no clear, the conclusions are not clear either direction. So from what I've read, I can't tell you. I don't know. Good or bad.
We won't know until we have some start to see the third eye. Then we have some clue
Oh,
what you're
well, no,
saying.
before that, but that seems to be, I mean, the research is new, and so there hasn't been enough done, length of time on that, from the things that I've read. And you can read one study that says, oh my goodness, absolutely terrible, horrible thing, and another one that says exactly the opposite. So at this point, it isn't conclusive. That does not mean it's safe or not safe. So I wish I had some better information, and that's all I got. Yeah.
Thank you.
You hear asbestos on the TV all the time and being exposed to it and mesothelioma. Limiting your exposure, you know, they talk about how employees used to use it in their jobs and therefore they were exposed day in and day out. How about for like the normal people like us, maybe we go to visit a relative's home that their house has asbestos siding on it, or they have popcorn ceilings before the year 1970 or whatever year it was, where it potentially might have asbestos in it. How much exposure should we be concerned about? Is that okay to go visit your relatives? Would that have the asbestos siding and possibly popcorn ceilings that might have asbestos in it, or is it just the disturbance of that in like removable or whatever that we have to be concerned about?
So I don't know what your answer would be, but as far as I know, it depends. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint specifically, okay, this person got cancer because they went to this person's house and had the asbestos, because there's so many different ways that we are exposed on a daily basis. It's hard to say. And like I said in the beginning, some carcinogens you have to be exposed for a really long time for it to actually do something. So if you're going to visit a friend's house and they have asbestos, it's hard to say whether or not, but I would say that for someone living in that, continuously, everyday breathing in that air, I would say that their exposure levels would probably increase their risk. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Well, we don't want to interrupt, family reunions or anything. that is not kind of what we want to do here. And I think, again, a lot of this is information, and so you balance out what makes sense. Same thing with looking at organic fruits and vegetables. If I were to make a suggestion, is that if some of us can't afford to buy organic fruits and vegetables. They're expensive at times. And so my choice would be to go ahead and still get fruits and vegetables because we know that there's a health benefit there, and wash them. So I think a lot of this is making choices about, here's some information, this is what we know, and then you make a choice that's right for you. I look at some of the cleaning products, and I don't think in this particular slide, but there was one thing out there about making your own wash clothes, washing detergent. Goodness sakes, big word. And so I looked at that and I'm like, you know what? In my life, that is just way too much work. I can't do that. But can I use vinegar and water on my mirrors to clean those? Yeah, that I can do. That I can make happen. So I think it's about kind of taking the steps that make sense to you. Know the information, and then take the steps that make sense to you.
Is it the asbestos and the fact that they have it on their house a problem, or is it disturbance of it, like a removal of breeding dust, or?
My understanding is that the removal is, and that disturbance is the more problematic piece of it. What exposure might happen before that, that I don't know.
Charles, you can't use that as an excuse to solve the thing.
I don't think there's no solving it.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Okay, so we have something pretty cool here. We brought the DermaScan with us, which is this piece of equipment that we have where you can put your face in, put some sunscreen on, and you can see the power of sunscreen and get to look at your face. And is that a UV light? Is it a UV light? Yeah, a UV light. So it's really cool. You guys have to check it out.
So the DermaScan, the reason we have this here is obviously one of the environmental exposures that we have is the sun, which we all love. But increased exposure to the sun, as we know, without sunscreen or protection, can also bump up our risk of skin cancer. So this just helps people sort of see whether or not they've had a little more sun exposure than perhaps they thought, and it also shows the power of sun